The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Old Tucson, Arizona, as Eliza Chambers stood frozen at her father's doorstep, her throat tight with fear, the letter that would change her life forever clutched in her trembling hands. The year was 1879, and at 22, Eliza had never once defied her father's will, not when he'd forbidden her from attending school past the age of 12, not when he'd burned her journals, and certainly not when he'd declared that a woman's opinions were worthless in a man's world. Inside the modest white clapboard house that had been her prison for as long as she could remember, Eliza could hear her father's boots stomping across the wooden floor. Judge William Chambers was the most feared man in Old Tucson, his reputation for harsh sentencing extending beyond the courthouse and into his own home. After her mother's death 5 years prior, his iron grip on Eliza had only tightened, crushing her spirit a little more each day. "What are you standin' out there for, girl?" her father barked from inside. "The supper ain't gonna cook itself." Eliza slipped the letter into the pocket of her faded blue dress and stepped inside. The heat from the kitchen stove had made the small house stifling, but she knew better than to open a window without permission. "The mail came," she said softly, moving toward the stove where a pot of beans had been simmering. "Anything important?" Judge Chambers barely looked up from his newspaper, her letter burned in her pocket, an acceptance to teach at a small school in San Francisco. For 3 years, she had been secretly corresponding with an old friend of her mother's who had encouraged her to apply. It was her one chance at freedom, but she needed her father's permission to leave. And at 38, the judge had made it abundantly clear that he expected his only daughter to remain at home, caring for him until his dying day. "Nothing of importance," she whispered, the lie bitter on her tongue. Judge Chambers grunted, turning the page of his newspaper. "The Richardson boy is being sentenced tomorrow. Horse thievin', he'll hang if I have anything to say about it." Eliza stirred the beans mechanically, her mind racing. Jacob Richardson was barely 19, and rumors around town suggested he'd been falsely accused. But no one dared question the judge's verdicts, least of all his daughter. "Your soup, father." She placed the bowl before him, careful not to spill a drop. He ate in silence while she stood nearby, hands folded, waiting for his next command. When he finished, he pushed back from the table and fixed her with a cold stare. "You've been quiet lately, more than usual." Eliza's heart stuttered. "I've had nothing worth saying." His eyebrows furrowed. "Good. A woman with too many words is like a wagon with a broken wheel, useless and in need of fixing." He stood, towering over her. "I'll be at the saloon, have my clothes pressed for tomorrow's sentencing." After he left, Eliza sank into his chair, drawing the letter from her pocket with shaking hands. Tomorrow would be her last chance. The stage coach to San Francisco would depart the day after next, and she had already packed a small bundle hidden beneath the loose floorboard in her room. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Eliza dressed carefully in her best dress, a modest navy blue with white lace at the collar, and pinned her honey blonde hair into a tight bun. Her father had already left for the courthouse, leaving behind his usual list of chores. Today, she would defy them all. She waited until mid-morning before slipping out of the house and making her way toward the courthouse. The dusty main street of Old Tucson was busy with the usual traffic of horses, wagons, and townspeople going about their business. No one paid her much attention. Judge Chambers' daughter was known to be as silent as a shadow. The courthouse steps were crowded with spectators eager to witness the Richardson boys' sentencing. Eliza squeezed through the throng, ignoring the curious glances. Women rarely attended such proceedings unless they were directly involved. Inside, the courtroom was stifling despite the open windows. Judge Chambers sat at his bench, his expression severe as the young Richardson boy stood before him, hands shackled. "Jacob Richardson," her father's voice boomed, silencing the murmurs. "You have been found guilty of horse theft, a crime punishable by hanging in this territory." "But I didn't do it," the boy protested, his voice cracking. "I was just in the wrong place." Silence. Judge Chambers slammed his gavel. "Your excuses mean nothing to this court." Eliza's hands tightened into fists. She knew the truth that Jacob had been set up by the Hollister brothers, who had stolen the horses themselves and planted evidence on the Richardson property. She had overheard them bragging about it at the general store just days ago, thinking no one was listening. But who would believe the silent daughter of the judge if there are no further statements? Her father continued, raising his gavel. I hereby sentence you to wait. The word burst from Eliza's lips before she could stop herself, loud enough to silence the entire courtroom. Every head turned toward her. Her father's face darkened with fury. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Eliza's legs trembled as she stepped forward. Jacob Richardson is innocent, she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. The Hollister brothers stole those horses. I heard them confessing to it at Wilkins' General Store 3 days ago. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Judge Chambers' face turned a deep shade of red. Eliza, he growled, you will leave this courtroom immediately? No, the single word fell like a stone in still water. I will not be silent any longer. Her father rose from his bench. Bailiff, remove my daughter. As the bailiff moved toward her, the courtroom doors burst open, and a tall figure strode in, spurs jingling with each step. The crowd parted to reveal a man Eliza had never seen before, broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and piercing blue eyes beneath the brim of a well-worn Stetson. Dust from the trail still clung to his denim pants and leather vest. Begging your pardon, Judge, the stranger said, his voice deep and steady, but I believe the young lady deserves to be heard. Judge Chambers' face contorted with rage. Who in tarnation are you to interrupt my court? Yates Harrington, the man replied, tipping his hat. Just rode in from Tombstone, and I happened to be at that general store too, heard the same confession the ladies talking about. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Eliza stared at the stranger in disbelief. She had not seen him at the store that day, but here he was, corroborating her story. This is outrageous, Judge Chambers sputtered. I will not have my authority undermined in my own courtroom. It ain't about authority, Judge, Yates said calmly. It's about justice. And that boy there, he nodded toward Jacob, doesn't deserve to hang for something he didn't do. For a long moment, Judge Chambers seemed too stunned to speak. Then, gathering his composure, he adjusted his spectacles and addressed the bailiff. Find the Hollister brothers and bring them in for questioning. To the court, he announced, this session is adjourned until tomorrow morning. As the crowd began to disperse, Judge Chambers descended from his bench and strode toward Eliza, his eyes cold with fury. You will return home immediately, he hissed. We will discuss your behavior there. Before Eliza could respond, Yates Harrington stepped between them. If you don't mind, Judge, I'd like a word with your daughter, seeing as we're both witnesses to the same crime. My daughter, Judge Chambers said through clenched teeth, does not speak with strange men. With all due respect, Yates replied, not backing down, she seemed plenty capable of speaking her mind just now, and I reckon she's old enough to decide for herself who she talks to. The judge looked as though he might explode, but aware of the lingering spectators, he leaned in close to Eliza. You have disgraced me today. Be home within the hour, or you will regret it deeply. With a final glare at Yates, he stormed out of the courtroom. Eliza stood frozen, the reality of what she had done crashing over her. She had defied her father publicly. There would be severe consequences. You all right, miss? Yates asked, his voice gentler now. She looked up at him, really seeing him for the first time. His face was weathered from years in the sun, but his eyes were kind. Why did you lie for me? She asked. You weren't at the general store. A hint of a smile touched his lips. No, I wasn't, but I know the Hollister brothers and I know their reputation. When I heard you speak up, I figured you were telling the truth. You risked perjury for a stranger. I risked it for justice, he corrected. And to hear your voice when you were brave enough to use it. Something in his words warmed her from within. Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Just Yates, he said. And you're Eliza Chambers, I take it, she nodded, suddenly aware of the stares they were attracting. I should go. My father will be mighty upset, I imagine, Yates finished for her. He studied her face for a moment. Can I walk you somewhere safer than your father's house? Just until he cools down. The offer was tempting more than tempting, but Eliza shook her head. "There's nowhere in Old Tucson he wouldn't find me. Then maybe it's time you considered leaving Old Tucson." The letter in her pocket seemed to burn against her skin. "I've thought about it," Yates nodded thoughtfully. "The stagecoach leaves tomorrow morning. I'll be on it, heading to Santa Fe, just something to consider." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and turned to leave. "I hope I hear your voice again, Miss Chambers. I want to hear every word you have to say." With that, he was gone, leaving Eliza standing in the empty courtroom, her heart pounding with fear, and beneath it, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The walk home was the longest of Eliza's life. Each step brought her closer to her father's wrath, yet something had changed inside her. The words she had spoken in court had broken a dam, and now thoughts and feelings long suppressed flowed freely through her mind. When she arrived at the house, her father was waiting on the porch, his face a mask of cold fury. "Inside," he commanded, holding the door open. Eliza stepped past him, her back straight despite her trembling hands. In the parlor, she turned to face him, bracing herself. "What possessed you?" he demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. "To humiliate me in my own courtroom. An innocent boy was about to hang," she replied, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. Judge Chambers' eyes narrowed. "Since when do you concern yourself with the law, you who can barely read?" The insult stung, but Eliza held her ground. "I can read perfectly well, Father. Mother taught me before she died, and I've taught myself since. So you've been defying me in secret for years." He paced the room like a caged animal. "I should have expected this. Your mother had the same willfulness, the same disregard for a woman's proper place." "Mother wasn't willful," Eliza countered. "She was kind and intelligent, and the slap came so suddenly that Eliza had no time to react. Her cheek burned and tears sprang to her eyes." "You will not speak of her," Judge Chambers seethed. "You will not speak at all. I have indulged you too long, allowed you too much freedom." He crossed to the fireplace and picked up the poker, jabbing it into the flames. "From this day forward, you will not leave this house without my permission. You will not speak to anyone, not shopkeepers, not neighbors, and certainly not strange cowboys who encourage your disobedience." Eliza watched as he stoked the fire, her mind racing. This was the moment she could submit as she always had, or she could choose a different path. "I'm leaving, Father," she said, the words rushing out before she could lose her courage. "I've been offered a teaching position in San Francisco. The stagecoach leaves tomorrow." For a long moment, Judge Chambers didn't move, the poker still clutched in his hand. When he finally turned, his face was eerily calm. "You will do no such thing. I'm 22 years old. I don't need your permission. You have no money, no connections. How far do you think you'll get?" Eliza reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter along with a small pouch. "Mrs. Bennett has been helping me save, and she sent funds for my passage." Her father's face contorted with rage. "Catherine Bennett, that interfering widow, has been corresponding with you behind my back." She was Mother's friend. "She's been sending me books, helping me prepare." With a roar, Judge Chambers lunged forward, snatching both the letter and the money from Eliza's hands. In one swift motion, he cast them into the fire. "No." Eliza cried, rushing forward, but her father grabbed her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "You are my daughter," he growled, his face inches from hers. "You will obey me as long as you live under my roof, and you will never speak to me like this again." In that moment, looking into her father's cold eyes, Eliza realized a terrible truth: he would never let her go. Not willingly. She would remain his silent, obedient daughter until one of them died. "Do you understand me?" he demanded, tightening his grip. Eliza lowered her eyes, feigning submission. "Yes, Father." Satisfied, he released her and straightened his jacket. "You will stay in your room until further notice. I will bring you food, and you will have time to reflect on your behavior." With that, he escorted her to her small bedroom at the back of the house, closing the door firmly behind her. Eliza heard the key turn in the lock, confirming her suspicions. She was now a prisoner in truth as well as in spirit. But as she sank onto her narrow bed, a plan was already forming in her mind. Beneath the floorboard lay her small bundle of possessions, along with a few dollars she had managed to hide from her savings. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to get her to Santa Fe. And in Santa Fe, there would be a cowboy with kind eyes who wanted to hear her voice. Night fell, bringing with it a sudden desert storm. Rain lashed against Eliza's window as she sat in darkness, listening to her father's movements in the house. Eventually, she heard him retire to his bedroom, and the house fell silent save for the howling wind. Eliza waited another hour, counting each minute by the ticking of the small clock on her nightstand. Then, with trembling hands, she pried up the loose floorboard and retrieved her bundle, a change of clothes, her mother's silver locket, a small book of poetry, and $7 wrapped in a handkerchief. The window was her only escape route. It wasn't a far drop to the ground below, but the storm made the prospect daunting. Still, freedom was worth the risk. Eliza changed into her sturdiest dress, wrapped her bundle in oilcloth, and carefully pried the window open. The wind immediately whipped rain into her face, soaking her hair and clothes. Ignoring her discomfort, she climbed onto the windowsill and lowered herself down, hanging by her fingertips before dropping the last few feet. She landed with a splash in a puddle, the impact jarring her bones, but she managed to keep her footing, staying close to the house to avoid being seen from her father's window. Eliza made her way to the street. The rain provided excellent cover, but it also made for treacherous going. By the time she reached the main thoroughfare, she was drenched to the skin and shivering. Old Tucson was deserted at this hour, particularly in such weather. The only establishment still showing lights was the Silver Dollar Saloon, where raucous laughter and piano music spilled into the night. Eliza hesitated, torn between seeking shelter and avoiding detection. She needed somewhere to wait out the night until the stagecoach departed at dawn, but a respectable woman didn't enter a saloon alone. As she stood indecisively in the rain, the saloon doors swung open, and a figure emerged, tall and unmistakable even in the downpour. "Miss Chambers," Yates Harrington's voice carried through the storm. "Is that you?" Eliza stepped forward into the pool of light from the saloon windows. "Mr. Harrington." He quickly shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You're soaked through. What in tarnation are you doing out in this weather?" "I'm leaving," she said, her teeth chattering. "Tonight, I can't stay with him anymore." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Come on," he said, guiding her toward a small building across the street. "The hotel's full up with the storm, but I've got a room at the boarding house. Mrs. Lopez is a respectable widow. She'll give you a place to dry off without compromising your reputation." Eliza hesitated, but another gust of wind drove rain painfully against her skin, deciding the matter. She allowed Yates to lead her to the boarding house, where a plump, gray-haired woman answered his knock with a concerned expression. "Dios mío, what happened to this poor girl, Mrs. Lopez?" exclaimed, ushering Eliza inside. "She needs a place to stay tonight, Mrs. Lopez," Yates explained. "Her situation is difficult." The older woman took one look at Eliza's face and nodded. "The judge's daughter, I understand." To Eliza's surprise, Mrs. Lopez didn't ask questions. Instead, she said, "I have a spare room. Come, child, let's get you dry before you catch your death." Within half an hour, Eliza was sitting by a crackling fire in the boarding house kitchen, wrapped in a borrowed nightgown and blanket, her wet clothes drying on a rack nearby. Mrs. Lopez had provided hot tea and then discreetly withdrawn, leaving Eliza alone with Yates. "Thank you," Eliza said softly, cradling the warm cup in her hands. "I don't know what I would have done." Yates sat across from her, his expression serious. "Your father doesn't know you've gone." She shook her head. "He locked me in my room. I climbed out the window." Yates whistled low. "You're braver than most men I know, Miss Chambers." A blush warmed Eliza's cheeks. "Not brave, desperate. Sometimes they're the same thing." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "What's your plan now?" "The stagecoach," she said. "Tomorrow morning, like you mentioned." She hesitated, then added in a small voice, "To Santa Fe." A slow smile spread across his face. "Well now, ain't that a coincidence? I burned my letter," she admitted. "My teaching position. And most of my money. I have $7 left. I don't know if it's enough to get me to Santa Fe, let alone start a new life there." It's enough to get you on that stage, Yates said firmly, and when we reach Santa Fe, we'll figure out the rest. He met her gaze steadily. I meant what I said in the courthouse, Miss Chambers. I want to hear every word you have to say, and I reckon that might take more than one stagecoach ride. Something fluttered in Eliza's chest, a feeling so unfamiliar that it took her a moment to recognize it as happiness. I've been silent for so long, Mr. Harrington, I'm not sure I remember how to speak properly. I think you're doing just fine, he said softly, and I think your voice is worth listening to. The firelight danced across his features, highlighting the kindness in his eyes, and for the first time since her mother's death, Eliza felt truly seen. Now, Yates continued, standing up, you should get some rest. Dawn comes early and the stage won't wait. As he moved toward the door, Eliza called after him. Mr. Harrington, he turned back. Yates, he corrected gently. Yates, she echoed, the name feeling right on her lips. Why are you helping me? You don't know me, he considered for a moment before answering. My mother was like you, smart, full of dreams, but married to a man who thought women should be seen and not heard. She died never having said half the things she wanted to say. His eyes held hers. I promised myself I'd never let another woman's voice be silenced if I could help it. With that, he bid her good night, leaving Eliza to stare into the flames, her heart full of something that felt dangerously like hope. Morning came too soon. The first rays of sunlight streaming through the kitchen window where Eliza had dozed in her chair by the dying fire. She startled awake, momentarily disoriented, then remembered today was the day she would leave Old Tucson forever. Mrs. Lopez appeared with fresh coffee and a simple breakfast of cornbread and eggs. Eat quickly, she advised. The stage leaves in half an hour and your father's men are already searching the town. Eliza's blood ran cold. How do you know? Deputy Finch was asking questions at the bakery across the street. Mrs. Lopez handed Eliza her now dry clothes. Best you change and be ready to move fast. By the time Yates arrived, Eliza was dressed, her small bundle clutched tightly in her hands. He looked grim as he entered the kitchen. Your father's got half the town looking for you, he said without preamble. We need to move now before they check here. Mrs. Lopez pressed a small package of food into Eliza's hands. For the journey, she said, then surprised Eliza with a fierce hug. Be brave, Nina, your mother would be proud. Eliza blinked back tears. How did you know my mother? Everyone knew Rose Chambers, the older woman replied. She taught many of us to read in secret. Your father never knew. This revelation stunned Eliza, but there was no time to process it. Yates was already at the door, peering out cautiously. Coast is clear for now, he reported. We'll take the back alley to avoid the main street. With a final grateful nod to Mrs. Lopez, Eliza followed Yates out the back door and into the narrow alleyway that ran behind the boarding house. The morning air was fresh and cool after the previous night's storm, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to promise new beginnings. They moved swiftly, keeping to the shadows where possible. Yates led her through a maze of back streets she had never explored, despite living in Old Tucson her entire life. As they neared the stagecoach station, he pulled her into a recessed doorway. Wait here, he instructed. I'll make sure the way is clear. Eliza pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding as Yates slipped around the corner. She could hear the commotion of the stagecoach preparing for departure, horses snorting, luggage being loaded, passengers saying their goodbyes. Freedom was so close she could almost taste it. Then, from behind her, came a voice that froze her blood. Well, look what we found. Eliza whirled to find Deputy Finch blocking the alleyway, his hand resting meaningfully on his holster. Your father's mighty worried about you, Miss Chambers, she straightened, gathering her courage. I'm leaving, Deputy Finch. Please don't try to stop me. He took a step closer. Now, you know I can't let you do that. The judge was clear you're to be brought straight home. I'm not a child or a criminal, Eliza said, her voice gaining strength. I'm a grown woman who's choosing to leave. Deputy Finch's expression hardened. You're coming with me, Miss Chambers, one way or another. As he reached for her arm, a voice rang out from the end of the alley. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Deputy. Yates stood with his feet planted wide, hand hovering near his holster. His expression was calm, but his eyes were as hard as flint. "This doesn't concern you, Harrington," Finch sneered. "This is family business." "The lady doesn't want to go with you," Yates replied evenly. "That makes it my business." Eliza could see Finch calculating his odds. The deputy was known more for bullying townsfolk than for his gunfighting abilities, while something in Yates' stance suggested a man who knew how to handle himself in a fight. "You're interfering with the law," Finch warned, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "No law against a woman choosing to leave town," Yates countered. "Now the stage is leaving in 5 minutes. Miss Chambers will be on it." For a tense moment, Eliza thought Finch might draw his gun. Then, with a muttered curse, he backed away. "The judge won't forget this," he spat. "Either of you, count on it," Yates replied. Once Finch had disappeared around the corner, he turned to Eliza. "We need to move, now." They hurried to the stagecoach station, where the driver was making his final call for passengers. Yates paid for their tickets, waving away Eliza's attempt to contribute her meager savings, and helped her into the coach, just as the driver cracked his whip. As the stagecoach lurched into motion, Eliza caught a glimpse of her father striding into the station, his face contorted with rage. Their eyes met for one electric moment before the coach rounded a corner and he was gone from sight. Eliza fell back against the leather seat, her heart pounding. She had done it. She had left Old Tucson and her father's tyranny behind. Across from her, an elderly couple and a middle-aged businessman regarded her curiously. Beside her, Yates sat with the relaxed posture of a man accustomed to long journeys, though she noticed his eyes remained alert, scanning the passing landscape for signs of pursuit. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Eliza realized she was trembling, though whether from fear or exhilaration she couldn't tell. "I've never defied him before," she whispered. "Not like this." Yates covered her hand with his own, a brief, reassuring touch. "First steps are always the hardest, but you've taken it now, and there's no going back." No going back. The words should have terrified her. She had left behind everything familiar, with only $7 and a small bundle of possessions to her name. Instead, she felt a wild, soaring sense of freedom. "I don't want to go back," she said, and for the first time in years she smiled without restraint. "I want to go forward." Yates returned her smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Then forward it is, Miss Chambers, all the way to Santa Fe." As the stagecoach rattled across the desert landscape, leaving Old Tucson farther behind with each passing mile, Eliza allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, her voice might finally be heard. The journey to Santa Fe was long and arduous, the stagecoach stopping only briefly at way stations to change horses and allow passengers a quick meal. By the third day, Eliza's body ached from the constant jostling, but her spirit remained buoyant. Each mile put more distance between her and her father's control, and she found herself speaking more freely with each passing hour. Yates proved to be a patient listener and engaging conversationalist. He told her stories of his travels throughout the territories, of buffalo hunts with the Comanche, of gold mining towns that rose and fell with the tides of fortune, of sunsets over the Grand Canyon that defied description. In return, Eliza shared the books she had read in secret, reciting passages from Emerson and Thoreau that had sustained her during her darkest hours. "You've got a remarkable memory," Yates commented after she had quoted a particularly long passage from Self-Reliance. "When books are scarce, you treasure every word," she replied. "I had to return most of Mrs. Bennett's books before Father could find them, so I memorized my favorite parts." Their fellow passengers changed at each stop, but Yates and Eliza remained constants, their corner of the coach becoming a world unto itself. The businessman had disembarked on the first day, replaced by a young mother with a sleeping infant. The elderly couple remained, occasionally joining in their conversations, but mostly dozing against each other's shoulders. On the afternoon of the fourth day, as they crossed into New Mexico territory, Yates finally asked the question Eliza had been dreading. "What will you do in Santa Fe?" Without your teaching position, I mean. Eliza looked out at the landscape passing by, the red rock formations catching the late afternoon sun. I don't know, she admitted. Find work, I suppose. I can read and write. I can keep accounts. I'm a quick learner. Santa Fe's growing fast, Yates said. Lots of opportunities for someone with your abilities. And you, she asked, turning back to him. What takes you to Santa Fe? A shadow crossed his face. Family business. My brother's been managing our ranch since our father died last year. It's time I took my share of the responsibility. You have a ranch near Santa Fe. This was the first Eliza had heard of it. Yates nodded. The Double H, nothing fancy, but it's good land. We run about 500 head of cattle, keep some horses. And you've been away. For too long, according to my brother. Yates smiled, but there was a tension in it that Eliza hadn't seen before. I've spent the past few years working as a scout for the Army, then tried my hand at prospecting, never could settle in one place for long. Until now, his eyes met hers. Maybe. Depends on what or who gives me reason to stay. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. In just 4 days, Yates Harrington had become more important to Eliza than she dared admit, even to herself. But she had just escaped one man's control. She wasn't ready to put herself under another's, no matter how kind his eyes or gentle his manner. I need to stand on my own, she said quietly. For the first time in my life. I understand, Yates replied, and she could tell he truly did. Just know that if you need anything at all, the Double H will welcome you. The stagecoach arrived in Santa Fe just after dusk on the 5th day. The city sprawled before them, its adobe buildings glowing warm in the fading light, the spire of the San Miguel Chapel rising above the rooftops. Despite her exhaustion, Eliza felt a thrill of excitement as they rumbled down the main street toward the station. It's beautiful, she breathed, taking in the bustling plaza where merchants were closing up their stalls for the evening. Wait until you see it in daylight, Yates said, smiling at her wonder. The sunlight on the adobe makes the whole city look like it's made of gold. At the station, Yates helped Eliza down from the coach, then collected their few belongings. The other passengers dispersed quickly, eager to reach their destinations after the long journey. Where will you go? Yates asked, his hat in his hands. In the lamplight of the station, he looked suddenly uncertain, almost boyish. Eliza glanced around, reality setting in. She was alone in a strange city with barely enough money for a night's lodging. Is there a respectable boarding house nearby, something affordable, Mrs. Ortiz runs a clean place 2 streets over, he said. My brother should be meeting me here soon. We can walk you there before we head to the ranch. As if on cue, a man approached from the direction of the stables, tall like Yates, but broader through the shoulders, with the same dark hair but a more serious set to his mouth. Yates, he called, clapping his brother on the shoulder in greeting. About time you showed up. Illy, Yates returned the greeting warmly. Good to see you. This is Miss Eliza Chambers. Miss Chambers, my brother Eliza Harrington. Illy tipped his hat politely, though his eyes held a question as they darted between his brother and Eliza. Miss Chambers, a pleasure. Mr. Harrington, Eliza replied, suddenly conscious of how she must appear after 5 days of travel. Your brother has been very kind during our journey. Has he now? Illy's eyebrow arched, and Eliza saw a silent communication pass between the brothers. Then, turning to her with unexpected warmth, he added, Any friend of Yates is welcome at the Double H, Miss Chambers. Thank you, but I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition, Illy interrupted. In fact, my wife was just saying yesterday that she wished for more female company out at the ranch. We're only an hour's ride from town. Eliza hesitated, looking to Yates, who seemed as surprised by the invitation as she was. You'd be doing Sarah a favor, Illy continued. And we've got plenty of room since Pa passed. The offer stands as long as you need. The kindness of the offer brought unexpected tears to Eliza's eyes. After years of isolation under her father's roof, to be welcomed so readily by strangers was overwhelming. Just until I find my feet, she finally agreed, and I'll earn my keep. We'll figure all that out tomorrow, Illy said, taking her bundle from Yates. For now, let's get you both home for a hot meal and a proper bed." As they made their way to where Ellie had left the wagon, Eliza felt a cautious optimism blooming inside her. This wasn't the future she had planned teaching in San Francisco, independent and alone, but perhaps it was the future she needed. A place to heal, to find her voice, and to discover who she truly was beyond her father's shadow. And if that place happened to include a certain blue-eyed cowboy who wanted to hear every word she had to say, well, that was a story still being written. The Double H Ranch sprawled across a picturesque valley 30 miles northeast of Santa Fe, sheltered on 3 sides by pine-covered foothills. As their wagon crested the final rise, Eliza gasped at the sight laid out before her. In the moonlight, she could make out a substantial main house built of timber and stone, several outbuildings, a large barn, and corrals where horses moved like shadows in the darkness. "It's much larger than I expected," she admitted as Ellie guided the wagon down the sloping road toward the ranch. "Been in the family for 3 generations," Yates explained. "Our grandfather started with just 50 acres and a dream. Now we run cattle across 5,000 acres. And it keeps us busy every minute of every day," Ellie added, a hint of reproach in his voice. Before Yates could respond, the front door of the main house burst open, spilling warm lamplight onto the porch. A slender woman hurried out, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, a young child balanced on her hip. "There's Sarah and little Matthew," Yates said, his face lighting up at the sight of his sister-in-law and nephew. "Best cook in the territory and the only woman who could ever tame my brother." Ellie's stern expression softened visibly. "She's something special, all right." The wagon had barely stopped before Yates leapt down and swept his nephew into his arms, spinning the giggling child in a circle before embracing Sarah warmly. Eliza watched from the wagon, feeling suddenly out of place in this family reunion. Ellie helped her down, then called to his wife. "Sarah, we've brought a guest. This is Miss Eliza Chambers. She'll be staying with us for a while." Sarah approached with a welcoming smile, wiping her hands on her apron. "Miss Chambers, what a lovely surprise. We don't get many visitors out here, especially not young ladies." "I hope I'm not imposing," Eliza began, but Sarah waved away her concerns. "Nonsense. It'll be wonderful to have another woman around. Come in, you must be exhausted after that dreadful stagecoach ride. I've got stew keeping warm, and I just took fresh bread from the oven." Inside, the house was a revelation, spacious but homey, with well-worn furniture arranged around a massive stone fireplace. Oil lamps cast a warm glow over polished wooden floors and colorful woven rugs. It was nothing like the austere formality of her father's house. This was a home where people truly lived and loved. Sarah whisked Eliza upstairs to a comfortable guest room with a window overlooking the valley. "The washroom is just down the hall," she explained, setting a pitcher of water on the dresser. "Take your time freshening up. Dinner won't spoil." Left alone, Eliza slowly unpacked her meager possessions, arranging them carefully in the oak dresser. Her mother's locket, her book of poetry, 2 dresses, undergarments, and a hairbrush, the sum total of her worldly goods. How strange that a life could be reduced to so little, yet feel so much fuller than before. After washing away the dust of travel and changing into her one clean dress, Eliza made her way downstairs to find the family gathered around a long pine table. Matthew, now clean-faced and in his nightshirt, sat on his father's lap, while Yates and Sarah brought steaming dishes from the kitchen. "Ah, there she is," Yates said, his eyes warming at the sight of her. "Feel better?" Eliza nodded, suddenly shy. "Much thank you." "Come sit by me," Sarah patted the bench beside her. "The men can serve themselves for once." Over a hearty meal of rabbit stew, fresh bread, and early summer vegetables from Sarah's garden, the family drew Eliza into their conversation with natural ease. Illy, initially reserved, proved to be thoughtful and well-informed about territorial politics. Sarah was quick-witted and kind, her affection for her husband evident in every glance. And Yates seemed transformed in his family's presence, more relaxed than Eliza had yet seen him, laughing freely as he entertained his nephew with exaggerated tales of their journey. It wasn't until Matthew had been put to bed and Sarah had brought out apple pie and coffee that the conversation turned to Eliza's situation. "Yates tells us you're from Old Tucson," Ellie said, his tone carefully neutral. "That's Judge Chambers' territory, isn't it?" Eliza set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "Yes, he's my father," Sarah's eyes widened. "The hanging judge, I've heard stories. They're probably all true," Eliza said quietly. "He's not an easy man." "Eliza left under difficult circumstances," Yates interjected, his voice gentle but firm. "She needs a fresh start, away from her father's influence." Ellie and Sarah exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Then Sarah reached across the table and squeezed Eliza's hand. "You're safe here," she said simply, "for as long as you need." Tears pricked at Eliza's eyes. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay such kindness." "Well, if you're set on repaying us," Ellie said, his practical nature reasserting itself, "we could use help around the place." Sarah's been trying to manage the household accounts, care for Matthew, oversee the kitchen garden, and help with the ranch hands' meals. It's too much for one person. "I'm an excellent bookkeeper," Eliza offered eagerly, "and I can garden, cook, sew, whatever's needed. You can read and write." Sarah asked, her expression brightening. "Very well. My mother made sure of it before she died." Sarah clasped her hands together. "Oh, that's wonderful. I've been wanting to start a small school for the ranch hands' children and some from neighboring properties. There are 8 little ones within riding distance who aren't getting any proper education." "A school?" Eliza's heart leapt. It wasn't San Francisco, but it was teaching the very thing she had dreamed of. "Just a few hours each day," Sarah continued enthusiastically. "We could use the old bunkhouse. It needs some fixing up, but Ellie's been meaning to repair it anyway, haven't you, dear?" Ellie nodded, looking bemused by his wife's excitement. "I suppose this gives me a reason to finally get to it." "And you could help me with the accounts in the afternoons," he added to Eliza. "Free me up to focus on the cattle operation. We'd pay you a fair wage, of course, in addition to room and board." Eliza looked around the table at these 3 people who had opened their home and hearts to her so readily. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Yates suggested, his blue eyes twinkling, "before they find more work for you to do." For the first time in longer than she could remember, Eliza laughed a real, uninhibited laugh that seemed to bubble up from some long-sealed wellspring within her. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it." Later, as the household settled for the night, Eliza stood by her bedroom window, gazing out at the moonlit valley. The vastness of the landscape matched the expansiveness she felt in her heart, as if, after years of confinement, her spirit had finally found room to grow. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her reverie. She opened it to find Yates standing in the hallway, a book in his hand. "Thought you might like some reading material," he said, offering it to her. "It was my mother's favorite, Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass." Eliza took the book reverently, running her fingers over the well-worn leather cover. "Thank you, I've never read Whitman." "You're in for a treat, then." He leaned against the doorframe, careful to remain in the hallway where propriety demanded. "He writes about freedom and the beauty of speaking one's truth. Reminded me of you." She clutched the book to her chest, strangely moved by the gesture. "Yates, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." "You don't need to thank me, Eliza." It was the first time he had used her given name without the formal miss, and it sent a small thrill through her. "I did what any decent man would do." "No," she disagreed softly, "not any man, you." She hesitated, then added, "In the courthouse when you said you wanted to hear every word I have to say." "Did you mean it?" His expression grew serious. "Every word," he confirmed, "for as long as you want to speak them." The sincerity in his voice made her brave. "And if it takes a lifetime to say everything I've kept inside all these years," a slow smile spread across his face. "Well, Miss Chambers, I reckon I've got nowhere better to be." With that, he bid her good night and disappeared down the hallway, leaving Eliza clutching Whitman's words and feeling, for the first time in her life, the exhilarating possibility of a future shaped by her own voice. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm that Eliza found both challenging and deeply satisfying. She rose early with the household, breakfasted with the family, then spent mornings in the converted bunkhouse teaching the ranch children. Her pupils, ranging in age from 5 to 12, approached their lessons with varying degrees of enthusiasm, but Eliza discovered a natural aptitude for teaching that surprised and delighted her. Afternoons were devoted to the ranch accounts, which Ellie had neglected to the point of near chaos. Eliza brought order to the ledgers, revealing that the Double H was more profitable than Ellie had realized, though certain expenses needed better management. "You've got a good head for business," Ellie remarked one afternoon as she presented her findings. "Better than mine or Yates combined." "My father insisted I manage his household accounts from the age of 14, Eliza explained. "It was the one skill he valued in me. His loss is our gain," Ellie replied with uncharacteristic warmth, "though I'm sorry for what you endured." In the evenings, Eliza helped Sarah with dinner and household chores, then joined the family in the parlor. Sometimes they played cards or read aloud. Other evenings, Yates would play his guitar while Sarah sang folk songs in her clear soprano. Little Matthew would inevitably end up in Eliza's lap, his curly head heavy against her shoulder as he drifted to sleep. These domestic scenes filled a void in Eliza's heart she hadn't known existed: the longing for family, for belonging, for the simple joy of being valued not for her silence but for her contributions. And through it all, there was Yates. Unlike his brother, who was tied to the daily operations of the ranch, Yates' responsibilities allowed him more flexibility. He often appeared at the schoolhouse door just as lessons concluded, offering to walk Eliza back to the main house. These walks became the highlight of her days as they ranged over topics from philosophy to politics to personal dreams. "Did you always want to be a rancher?" she asked him one warm July afternoon as they meandered through a meadow bright with wildflowers. Yates plucked a columbine and twirled it between his fingers. "Not always. As a boy, I wanted to be an explorer, to see what was beyond the next ridge, then the next. Pa called it wanderlust." "Is that why you left after he died?" "Partly." He handed her the flower. "But mostly I left because Ellie and I couldn't agree on how to run things. He wanted to expand, take risks. I was more cautious, like Pa had been. And now," Yates shrugged, "now I can see he was right about some things, wrong about others. Time and distance give perspective." "As does a good set of account books," Eliza added with a smile. "Your brother has a solid business mind, but he needs someone to temper his enthusiasm with practicality." "Someone like you," Yates gave her a sidelong glance. Eliza blushed. "I didn't mean to presume, no presumption," he assured her quickly. "You've become indispensable around here. Even Ellie admits it, and he's not a man who admits much." The compliment warmed her, but also brought a twinge of uncertainty. Her position at the Double H was still undefined, neither family nor hired help, but something in between. And her feelings for Yates had grown from gratitude into something deeper, more complex, something she wasn't sure she was ready to name. As July turned to August, the uncertain nature of her situation was brought sharply into focus by the arrival of a letter addressed to Ellie. Eliza recognized the handwriting immediately, her father's precise, authoritative script. She was sorting mail in the study when she came across it, and her hands trembled so badly that she dropped the entire stack. That was how Yates found her, kneeling among scattered envelopes, her face pale. "Eliza, what's wrong?" Wordlessly, she held out the letter. Yates took it, his expression darkening as he recognized the sender. "He found me," she whispered. "How did he find me?" "Old Tucson's not that far," Yates said grimly. "And your father has connections. We should have expected this." Ellie chose that moment to enter the study, stopping short at the sight of them huddled on the floor among scattered papers. "What in tarnation?" Yates handed him the letter. "From Judge Chambers, Eliza's father." Ellie's face grew serious as he turned the unopened envelope in his hands. "I think we'd better discuss this as a family. Sarah should be present too." 10 minutes later, they were gathered in the parlor, Ellie standing by the fireplace, Sarah seated beside Eliza on the sofa, and Yates pacing by the window. The letter lay unopened on the coffee table between them, like a snake poised to strike. "Before I open this," Ellie said, I want to be clear about something. Eliza, in the months you've been here, you've become important to this family. Whatever is in this letter doesn't change that." Sarah squeezed Eliza's hand in silent agreement. "But," Illy continued, "your father is a powerful man, and if he's determined to force your return, we need to know what we're facing." "I won't go back," Eliza said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I can't." Yates stopped pacing to stand behind her, a solid presence at her back. "No one's sending you anywhere you don't want to go, not while I'm breathing." Illy nodded, then broke the seal on the envelope. As he read, his expression remained carefully neutral, giving nothing away. When he finished, he passed the letter to Sarah, who read it quickly, her eyebrows rising. "Well," Yates demanded impatiently. "What does the old tyrant want?" Sarah handed the letter to Eliza. "You should read it yourself, dear." With trembling fingers, Eliza unfolded the paper. Her father's words leapt out at her, cold and precise. "Mr. Harrington, it has come to my attention that my daughter, Eliza, has taken refuge at your ranch following her impetuous departure from Old Tucson. While I understand that young women are prone to flights of fancy and rebellion, I must insist on her immediate return to her proper home and family. Eliza has always been of a nervous disposition and subject to fanciful ideas. She requires firm guidance and supervision, which I, as her father, am legally obligated to provide until such time as she marries. I am prepared to send an escort to retrieve her, or, should you prefer to avoid any unpleasantness, you may deliver her to Sheriff Thornton in Santa Fe, who will arrange for her safe return. I trust you understand the seriousness of harboring a young woman against her father's wishes and will make the appropriate arrangements promptly." Judge William Chambers. Eliza let the letter fall from her fingers. "He makes me sound like a child, or worse, a lunatic." "It's a common tactic," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. "Men like your father rely on others accepting their authority without question." "He has no authority over me," Eliza insisted. "I'm 22 years old." "Unfortunately," Illy said carefully, "the law isn't entirely clear on that point. An unmarried woman still falls under her father's guardianship in many territories, regardless of age." "That's barbaric," Sarah exclaimed. "That's reality," Illy countered. "I'm not saying it's right, just that we need to understand what we're up against." Yates, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "There's an obvious solution." All eyes turned to him. "Eliza needs to get married," he said simply. "Once she has a husband, her father's guardianship ends." A heavy silence fell over the room. Eliza felt her cheeks burning, unable to look at Yates. "That's certainly one approach," Illy said carefully. "But marriage isn't something to be entered into lightly, just to solve a legal problem." "I agree," Sarah added, giving her brother-in-law a pointed look. "Eliza should marry when and if she chooses, for love not to escape her father." Yates ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm not suggesting a loveless marriage of convenience. I'm saying," he stopped abruptly, seeming to realize what he was about to declare in front of his entire family. Eliza finally found her voice. "I appreciate the concern, all of you, but I won't run from one man's control into another's, no matter how well-intentioned." She stood, gathering her dignity around her like a cloak. "I'll write to my father myself, make my position clear." "And if he doesn't accept it?" Illy asked gently. "Then we'll face that when it comes," she replied with more confidence than she felt. "But I won't live in fear of him anymore. That's what he wants, for me to be silent and afraid. I refuse to give him that power." Later that evening, after she had written and sealed her reply to her father, a firm but respectful declaration of her independence, Eliza found Yates alone on the porch, staring out at the darkening landscape. "I've finished my letter," she said, leaning against the railing beside him. "Illy will send it with tomorrow's mail wagon." Yates nodded, still looking outward. "Good, that's good." His unusual reticence concerned her. "Are you angry with me for rejecting your suggestion?" He turned to her then, his expression pained. "No, Eliza, never. He broke off, struggling with his words. "I spoke without thinking, put you in an awkward position. You were trying to help. Was I?" He gave a humorless laugh. "Or was I using your situation as an excuse?" Eliza's heart began to race. An excuse for what? Yates took a deep breath, then looked directly into her eyes. For asking what I've wanted to ask since the moment you stood up in that courtroom and found your voice. He took her hands in his calloused palms warm against her skin. I love you, Eliza Chambers. I love your courage, your kindness, your sharp mind. I love watching you with those children in the schoolhouse, seeing how you light up when you're teaching them. I love hearing your thoughts on everything from cattle prices to Walt Whitman. Tears filled Eliza's eyes as Yates continued, his voice growing more fervent. I don't want to be another man controlling your life. I want to be your partner, someone who stands beside you, not above you. Someone who gets to hear every word you have to say for the rest of our lives. Yates, she began, but he shook his head. Let me finish, please. I'm not asking you to marry me now to solve this problem with your father. I'm asking you to consider a future with me when you're ready, if you're ever ready. Eliza's heart felt too full for her chest, emotions she had never allowed herself to feel rushing through her like a flash flood. I don't know what to say, a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. That's a first. The gentle tease broke the tension, and Eliza laughed through her tears. I care for you, Yates, more than I've ever cared for anyone, but I'm still finding my voice, discovering who I am when I'm free to be myself. I understand, he said, and she could see that he truly did. Take all the time you need, I'll be here listening. Impulsively, she rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his cheek. Thank you, she whispered, for being the first person who ever truly heard me. As she turned to go inside, Yates called after her softly. Eliza. She paused in the doorway, looking back at him silhouetted against the fading light. Whatever happens with your father, he said, we'll face it together, all of us. You're not alone anymore. For the first time since leaving Old Tucson, Eliza truly believed it. September brought cooler weather, and an unexpected development. Judge William Chambers himself arrived in Santa Fe, lodging at the finest hotel and making inquiries about the Double H Ranch. Word reached Eli through business contacts in town, setting the household on edge. He won't come to the ranch, Eli assured them over breakfast. Too proud, he'll expect us to come to him. Then he'll be disappointed, Yates said firmly. No one's meeting with him. I will, Eliza said quietly, setting down her coffee cup. It's time I faced him directly. Absolutely not, Yates protested. He could force you to return with him. In the middle of Santa Fe, with witnesses? Eliza shook her head. He's too concerned with appearances for that. Besides, I've been practicing what I need to say to him for months. Sarah looked worried. At least don't go alone, Eliza. I'll accompany her, Eli offered, surprising them all. As her employer, I have a legitimate reason to be present. Yates opened his mouth to object, but Eli silenced him with a look. You're too emotionally involved, brother. Your presence would only antagonize the judge. I'll keep Eliza safe. Reluctantly, Yates conceded the point, though he insisted on riding into town with them and waiting nearby during the meeting. The next day, Eliza found herself seated beside Eli in the grand lobby of the Montezuma Hotel, waiting for her father to join them for tea. Remember, Eli said quietly, you have nothing to be ashamed of. You've built a respectable life here. Eliza nodded, smoothing her dress, a new one that Sarah had helped her make, deep blue with white trim, more fashionable and becoming than anything she had owned in Old Tucson. Her hair was neatly arranged, her posture perfect. She would face her father as an equal, not a wayward child. When Judge Chambers entered the lobby, Eliza's resolve wavered momentarily. He looked older than she remembered, the lines on his face deeper, his hair grayer. But his bearing was as intimidating as ever, his eyes cold as they settled on her. Eliza, he said by way of greeting, not extending his hand. Father, she replied, rising to her feet. May I present Mr. Eliza Harrington, my employer? The judge's gaze shifted to Eli, assessing him. Harrington, you received my letter. I did, Eli confirmed, his manner cordial but reserved. Shall we be seated? The hotel has prepared tea. They settled at a small table in a corner of the lobby where a silver tea service awaited them. Eliza poured with steady hands, years of practice serving her father coming to her aid now. For several minutes, they engaged in stiff, formal conversation, the judge inquiring about the ranch, Eli responding with polite but minimal information, Eliza remaining mostly silent. Finally, Judge Chambers set down his cup with a decisive click. "I didn't come all this way for pleasantries, Mr. Harrington. I came for my daughter. She belongs in Old Tucson under my roof." "I disagree, Father," Eliza said before Eli could respond. "I've established myself here. I have meaningful work, respected friends, a life of my own." The judge's eyebrows rose at her directness. "A temporary arrangement at best. It's time to end this foolish rebellion and return home where you belong." "This isn't rebellion," Eliza countered. "I'm a grown woman making my own choices." "Choices," he scoffed. "What do you know of the world? You've been sheltered your entire life." "Sheltered?" Eliza's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby patrons. She lowered it again with effort. "Is that what you call it? I call it imprisoned, silenced." Color rose in her father's cheeks. "I protected you from a harsh world." "You protected yourself," Eliza corrected him. "From having to acknowledge that I have thoughts and feelings of my own, that I might disagree with you as mother sometimes did." At the mention of her mother, Judge Chambers' expression hardened. "Leave her out of this." "I can't," Eliza said, finding strength in the memory of her gentle, intelligent mother. "She taught me to think for myself even when you forbade it. She wanted me to have a voice." "She filled your head with nonsense," the judge snapped. "Ideas above your station, my station." Eliza leaned forward. "I'm a teacher now, Father. I run a small school for ranch children. I manage business accounts. I'm respected for my mind, not feared for my silence." For the first time, the judge seemed taken aback. "A teacher, you?" "Yes," Eliza confirmed, "and I'm good at it. The children are learning, thriving. It's the work Mother always wanted for me." Something flickered in her father's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, or a grudging recognition. "This changes nothing. You have no legal standing to refuse my authority." Eli, who had been observing silently, finally spoke. "With respect, Judge Chambers, the law in this territory gives more latitude to adult women than you might expect, particularly those who are self-supporting." "You're a rancher, not a lawyer," the judge dismissed him. "True," Eli acknowledged. "But my wife's brother is the territorial prosecutor, and we've consulted with him extensively on Eliza's status. She has options you may not have considered." This was stretching the truth. Sarah's brother was indeed a prosecutor, but they had not discussed Eliza's case with him. Still, the judge didn't need to know that. "Are you threatening me, Harrington?" Judge Chambers asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Not at all," Eli replied calmly. "Simply informing you of the legal realities. Eliza has built a respectable life here. Attempting to force her return could result in a public legal battle that would benefit no one, least of all a judge with a reputation to maintain." The judge's eyes narrowed as he considered this, then turned back to Eliza. "You found your voice, I see, and allies to support it." "I have," Eliza agreed, "but what I want most, Father, is peace between us. I don't wish to be your enemy." "Then return home with me," he insisted, though with less conviction than before. Eliza shook her head firmly. "My home is here now, but I would welcome correspondence between us. A relationship based on mutual respect, not authority." For a long moment, Judge Chambers studied his daughter's face as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, he said, "You look so like her. Your mother, same stubborn chin." It was as close to concession as she was likely to get. "She would be proud, I think," Eliza said softly, "of both of us if we can find a way forward." The judge didn't respond directly, but when he spoke again, his tone had changed. "This school of yours, do you have proper materials, books?" Surprised by the question, Eliza answered honestly, "We make do with what we have. Books are scarce out here," he nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "I have your mother's library in storage. Educational texts, literature, she would have wanted you to have them." The unexpected offer brought tears to Eliza's eyes. "I would treasure them, Father, thank you. Don't thank me yet," he warned, some of his sternness returning. "I still believe you belong in Old Tucson, but I won't force the issue, for now." It wasn't full acceptance, but it was a beginning and acknowledgement that she had the right to her own path. For Eliza, that was victory enough. As they parted in the hotel lobby, her father awkward and formal, Eliza felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She was no longer running from her past. She was walking toward her future, her voice growing stronger with each step. Outside, Yates was waiting, his anxious expression clearing when he saw her smile. "You're all right." "Better than all right," she assured him, taking his arm as they walked toward where their horses were tethered. "I said what needed saying and he heard me, really heard me maybe for the first time, and he's not insisting you return, not for now," she said. "It's a truce, not a surrender." "But it's a start." Yates squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you, Eliza. Standing up to him like that took courage." "Not courage," she corrected him. "Practice. Every time I speak up, it gets a little easier." As they mounted their horses and began the ride back to the Double H, Eliza felt a sense of completion, a circle closing. She had fled Old Tucson in silence and fear. She was returning to her new home in strength and hope, her voice found, her heart opening to possibilities she had never dared imagine before. And riding beside her was a man who had promised to listen to every word she had to say for as long as she wished to speak them. The last golden days of autumn ushered in new beginnings at the Double H. Eliza's father, true to his word, sent her mother's library 6 crates of carefully packed books that transformed the small schoolhouse into a proper place of learning. Along with the books came a brief note. "Your mother would be pleased. Perhaps someday I will visit to see this school of yours. Until then, know that your old room remains as you left it, should you ever wish to return." Father, it wasn't an apology, but for Judge William Chambers, it was an olive branch. Eliza wrote back, sharing news of her students' progress and enclosing a small watercolor that one of the children had painted of the schoolhouse. Building bridges would take time, but each letter was a step forward. October brought the cattle roundup with all hands needed for the massive undertaking. To everyone's surprise, Eliza proved adept at the bookkeeping aspects of the operation, keeping track of head counts, sales, and expenses with meticulous precision. She even rode out with Sarah to deliver meals to the men working the far pastures, discovering an unexpected enjoyment in horseback riding. "You're a natural," Yates told her one evening as they rode back to the ranch house together, the sunset painting the landscape in shades of copper and gold. "Sure you haven't been hiding cowgirl skills all these years?" Eliza laughed, patting her mount's neck affectionately. "Hardly. I'd never even sat on a horse until I came here. Father thought it unladylike." "Your father missed out on knowing an extraordinary woman," Yates said, his expression softening as he looked at her. "His loss, my gain." In the weeks since her confrontation with her father, Eliza and Yates had grown closer, their evening walks extending longer, their conversations delving deeper. They had not spoken directly of his declaration that night on the porch, but it hung between them not as a pressure or expectation, but as a promise waiting to be claimed when the time was right. That time came on a crisp November evening as they sat together on a blanket near the creek that ran through the eastern section of the ranch property. The roundup was complete, the ranch settling into its winter rhythm, and they had ridden out to watch the sunset. "I've been thinking," Eliza said, breaking a comfortable silence. "A dangerous pastime," Yates teased, earning a playful swat to his arm. "I'm being serious," she protested, though her eyes danced with humor. "I've been thinking about what you said that night on the porch. About us having a future together." Yates grew still beside her, and Eliza took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "And I think I'm ready to consider it, more than consider it." She twisted her hands in her lap, suddenly nervous. "What I'm trying to say is, I love you, Yates Harrington. I love your kindness, your patience, the way you listen not just with your ears but with your heart. I love who I am when I'm with you, braver, stronger, more myself than I've ever been." Yates' face transformed, joy lighting his features. "Eliza, let me finish," she said, echoing his words from months ago. "I want a future with you. I want to build something together, not just a home or a family, but a life where both our voices matter equally." "Nothing would make me happier," Yates said, taking her hands in his. "I've loved you since that first moment in the courthouse when you stood up for what was right despite your fear. I knew then that you were someone special, someone worth listening to for a lifetime." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in soft cloth. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." Unwrapping it, he revealed a simple but elegant ring, a single sapphire set in silver. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Illy had our grandmother's ring for Sarah, so Pa gave this one to me before he died. Said I should save it for a woman with spirit." Eliza laughed through sudden tears. "And is that what I am? A woman with spirit, the most spirited woman I've ever known," Yates confirmed, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Eliza Chambers, will you marry me? Will you let me hear every word you have to say for the rest of our lives?" "Yes," she said, the single word carrying all the conviction in her heart. "Yes, I will marry you." As Yates slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into a tender kiss, there first Eliza felt the final pieces of her new life falling into place. From the silent, shadowy daughter of the hanging judge, she had transformed into a woman who knew her own mind and spoke it freely. A woman who had found not just her voice, but people who valued it, people who loved her not despite her voice, but because of it. Their wedding took place on Christmas Eve, with snow dusting the ground and pine boughs decorating the ranch house. Eliza wore a gown of ivory satin that Sarah had helped her make, with her mother's locket around her neck and a crown of winter berries in her hair. Yates, looking uncommonly handsome in a new black suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him on Ellie's arm. The ceremony was small but joyful ranch hands and their families, neighbors from miles around, and, to everyone's surprise, Judge William Chambers himself, standing stiffly at the back until Eliza spotted him and insisted he join the family at the front. "You came," she whispered as he took his place beside her, his face uncharacteristically uncertain. "You invited me," he replied simply, "and I wanted to hear you say your vows." It was the closest he had ever come to acknowledging the value of her voice, and Eliza impulsively kissed his cheek, leaving him flustered but visibly moved. When the time came to exchange vows, Eliza and Yates had prepared their own words, a departure from tradition that raised some eyebrows but felt right to them both. "Eliza," Yates began, his voice steady as he held her hands before friends and family, "I promise to be your partner in all things. To walk beside you, not ahead or behind. To listen when you speak and hear what's in your heart. To respect your mind and cherish your spirit. To love you completely through all the words and silences of our life together." Tears glistened in Eliza's eyes as she responded, her voice clear and confident. "Yates, I promise to share my life and my words with you, to speak honestly and listen openly, to build with you a home where truth is valued and voices are heard. To love you faithfully through all our joys and sorrows, all our agreements and disagreements, all the days of our lives." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, Eliza was conscious of her father watching, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. Later, during the celebration that followed, he approached her as she stood with Yates receiving congratulations. "I never heard your mother's and my wedding vows," he said abruptly. "The judge who married us spoke them, and we merely repeated 'I do.' Would you have preferred we do the same?" Eliza asked, uncertain where his thoughts were leading. Judge Chambers shook his head slowly. "No, your words were fitting for both of you." He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I brought something for you, a wedding gift." From his coat, he withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. Eliza opened it to find a journal bound in soft leather, its pages blank and waiting. "Your mother kept journals," the judge explained, not meeting her eyes. "I found them after she died. Never read them, felt it would be an invasion, but they seemed to bring her comfort. I thought perhaps." "Thank you, Father," Eliza said softly, touching his arm. "It's a perfect gift." The judge nodded then, with a brief nod to Yates, retreated to a quieter corner of the room. It wasn't reconciliation, not completely, but it was acknowledgement of her voice, her choices, her life. After the guests had departed and the household had settled for the night, Eliza and Yates stood together on the porch of the small cabin that would be their home, a wedding gift from Ellie and Sarah, situated on a pretty rise overlooking the valley, close enough to the main house for convenience, but far enough for privacy. "Happy, Mrs. Harrington?" Yates asked, his arm warm around her waist as they gazed up at the star-filled sky. "Very," Eliza confirmed, leaning into him. "Though I may keep Chambers for my teaching work, Mrs. Eliza Chambers Harrington has a certain professional ring to it." Yates laughed, the sound rich in the cold night air. "Whatever name you choose is fine by me as long as you come home to me at the end of each day." "Always," she promised, turning in his arms to face him. "You know, for years I dreamed of escaping Old Tucson, finding somewhere I could speak freely. I never imagined I'd find someone who wanted to hear me." "I want to hear everything," Yates assured her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Every thought, every dream, every opinion, even when we disagree." "Especially when we disagree," Eliza corrected with a smile. "That's when listening matters most." As they stepped inside their new home together, closing the door on the world outside, Eliza reflected on the journey that had brought her here from a frightened, silent girl to a woman confident in her own voice and value. It hadn't been an easy path, but it had led her to this moment, to this man, to a life full of words and love and possibility. Her voice had been silenced once, but never again. Now, and for all their days to come, every word she spoke would be heard, valued, and treasured by the man who had promised to listen for a lifetime. Epilogue: 5 years later, "Mama, tell the story again." 4-year-old Rose begged, her blue eyes so like her father's wide with anticipation. "About how you and Papa met." "Again," Eliza laughed, settling more comfortably in the rocking chair, adjusting 2-year-old William on her lap. "You've heard it so many times you could probably tell it yourself. But you tell it best," Rose insisted, leaning against her mother's knee. "Please." "Go on, tell them," Yates encouraged from the doorway of the nursery where he had paused on his way in from evening chores. "I like that story too." Eliza smiled at her husband, her heart still skipping at the sight of him even after 5 years of marriage. "Very well. Once upon a time, there was a young woman whose voice had been silenced by her father." As she wove the familiar tale for her children, softened in places, simplified in others, but true in its essence, Eliza marveled at how far they had all come. The Double H had prospered under the joint management of the Harrington brothers, with Eliza's continued oversight of the financial aspects. Her small schoolhouse had grown into a proper school serving children from across the county, with 2 additional teachers now helping share the load. Judge Chambers had gradually become a more regular presence in their lives, visiting twice yearly and corresponding monthly. He was still formal, still reserved, but he doted on his grandchildren in his own awkward way, and he had even begun to unbend enough to engage in occasional debates with Eliza about territorial politics. "And then," Eliza continued, watching Rose's rapt expression, "the cowboy said to the young woman, 'I want to hear every word you have to say,' and for the first time in her life she believed someone might actually listen." "And did he?" Rose asked, as she always did at this point in the story. "Did the cowboy listen?" "He's still listening," Yates said, coming to stand behind Eliza's chair, his hand warm on her shoulder. "Every day." "And the young woman," Eliza concluded, reaching up to cover his hand with her own. "She never stopped talking, and they lived happily ever after." "The end," Rose declared, satisfied. But as Eliza looked up at Yates, then at their children, Rose with her boundless energy and endless questions, William with his thoughtful eyes and quiet determination, she knew it wasn't an ending at all. It was the middle of a story still unfolding, a life built on words freely spoken and lovingly heard, a voice once silenced, now singing clear and true in the wide, open spaces of love.